Good. Jawohl. Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for January 22nd, 2018. We'll begin.
I just want to make an announcement before we.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, for the community that's here, but even though it's not broad enough. So I just, as a reminder, so that as the applicant community is aware, the board is now requiring that copies of the most recent flood insurance rate maps, otherwise known as FIRMs, be provided with the application indicating the subject location on the map where a project falls within a flood zone, and the application was filed prior to January 16, 2018. A ZRD1 and a CCD1 must be obtained from DOB, confirming that the project complies with Article 6, Chapter 4 and Appendix G in the Building Code, Article 6, Chapter 4 in the zoning resolution. For all applications filed subsequent to January 16, 2018, firm maps must be provided, and all projects located in flood zones must undergo full plan review at DOB, and the DOB objection sheets included in the application materials.
Okay, good. Decision items, item number 1, 54967BZ, 7-9 Elm Tree Lane, the Bronx.
They requested a deferral of decision. They need to complete their survey.
Continued hearing items, item number 2, 7-57BZ, 2317 Ralph Avenue, Brooklyn.
This was administratively adjourned due to a late submission. That's the other, reminder to the community. We are strictly enforcing the submission deadlines. If the submission is late, 11:59 on the day of the submission due date, it will be adjourned administratively. This is so that we can free up the calendar for those who, for cases that we can put on easily for the following 1 or 2 hearings.
Item number 3, 52864BZ, 24002 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, this is kind of this ongoing compliance hearing. With respect to, I just want to, we had an issue about the drainage on that curb cut on 234th Street. We have reached out to the Department of Parks.
That is correct.
Oh, okay. So did you want to add anything? We reached out to the Department of Parks.
They're looking into it.
Okay,
yeah.
Because we think the source of the pooling is actually the runoff from the adjacent park, and that they need to do something about that retaining wall. The applicant says that the Alt-1 application was reinstated on November 27th by paying the reinstatement fee, but when I go onto BIS, I don't see that the permit was renewed or anything, so other than reinstating it, I don't know what good it is because they don't have a permit.
What do you mean by the Alt-1?
So they were supposed to do some, so there's an alteration type 1 application that is an old application that needed to be reinstated. They said that in order to make improvements for their office, they needed a new permit. And I said, why you have an open application, just open it, reopen it.
That's having to do with the trailer, coming out of the trailer and going into the office.
Right, but they said, even though they didn't show us photographs, that they removed the trailer, but then they didn't show us photographs that they did, and that they've moved people inside anyway.
Right.
So maybe they don't need to do any interior work, that's their business, but that's what was supposedly holding them up. So if it's removed, then that was our issue. Also, the proposed plans still show the subject of the initial expansion application. So those have to be, that's no longer before us. That was denied. And it needs to be removed. So take out that second section of plans. Bollards are shown on the existing plan E1, but only on one side. They need to be shown on both sides along Northern Boulevard. The photos show they are on both sides and with chains, and the drawings need to indicate that they're on both sides with chains and show the spacing. Photos show landscaping up against and on the outside of the fencing. but the plan doesn't show any fencing at all. I can't tell whether the planting is on the property line or not, or within the property line. And how is the landscaping plan that they provided anywhere near what was required by the 1991 grant, which required 10-foot planting strips along the perimeter along Almeida, Hanford, and also adjacent to Lot 17, where they're showing like 3 tiny bushes. So I don't see how that is responsive to the issue of compliance. It's not a new application, it's compliance here, right? They need to also make sure all the plans show the same information consistently, because the landscaping plan doesn't show the bollards, and the bollards don't show the landscaping, et cetera, et cetera. Just a general question is, why is this all so hard to get accomplished? We have been, this application has been going on and on and on and on, and that's why it turned into a compliance hearing. So it's a general comment about the poor quality of the work. They also need to provide a photo of the removed trailer, and all the photos need to be keyed to the plans. And this is a message that I'll give to the applicant tomorrow, but I want the owner to attend this hearing tomorrow so that he can stay on top of the consultants. We received a withdrawal of representation letter from Richard Lovell's office in early December. I thought that was going to finally get us on track to move this forward, and because they were engaged to deal with the compliance hearing, and then they withdrew. So that's not a very positive sign. The original case was dismissed for failure to prosecute, and the owner needs to attend tomorrow to understand that failure to comply with the terms of the variance can result in its termination. Therefore, he'll have to close his business because it makes it an illegal business to operate. And it would be a real shame if the reason for this failure is inattentiveness on the part of the owner or its consultants. So
I actually think that the consultants might be a little confused actually into thinking that if they just restored the landscaping and complied, that they would get their amendment to their original variance. And I think that's why they put the proposed site plan in.
Yeah.
And it has to be clear that those are 2 separate cases.
Right.
And they have to be prosecuted separately.
Right, okay.
I agree with
Yeah, it could be. They may even not realize that this is no longer a variance hearing.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I think.
Missed that
Yeah.
case.
Right.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
Item number 4, 23501BZ, 2009 Mermaid Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. The little tax lot on the corner was finally subdivided from the subject tax lot, as we discussed at the prior hearings. However, it appears to be still on the same zoning lot. It doesn't really cure the issue that we have to deal with. And I don't see any indication that they filed an application with DOB to subdivide the zoning lot, which is something you specifically have to do. They said in their, I think it was they said at the last hearing that they were going to have a meeting with DOB in November to discuss this question, so I'd like to know what the outcome of that meeting was. The proposal for that little lot is to build a complying building on it. But since it's part of the zoning lot that's the subject of this variance, we actually need to see some kind of drawings for that, because it's all part of the same approval.
Unless it is not part of the zoning law. If it is separated out, then we don't have to review it.
Right, but that's the point, is they didn't subdivide the zoning lot, and there was a discussion at the last hearing that maybe the lot's too small to be a standalone lot.
I think they have now they've carved out the tax lot just enough to meet the minimum requirement, lot size requirement.
Right. That's why it has a little extension in the back.
Yeah.
Well, but still, subdividing a zoning lot is a specific application, and they describe their application as amending the meets and bounds. That's not necessarily the meets and bounds of the zoning lot, because famously, especially architects, don't know the difference between the tax lot, and the zoning lot meets and bounds description. So, so yeah, we just don't really know what's happening. It's Cooper Street. We also were supposed to have received photos to show the landscaping and street trees, which we didn't receive, and we were supposed to get signage calculations, which we didn't receive. Anything
I
else?
thought the signage calculation they had provided in the sheet.
They were like, they weren't really calculations, they were, I don't know, they're sort of numbers related to the sign without totaling it
What the
and telling us
requirements,
what the
okay.
requirements are, and it's not a calculation really. And anyway, we have an official signage zoning calculation sheet at the BSA,
Right.
so that's one place it could be done in addition to on the drawings.
And should be done by frontage, because there
Yes.
are 3 frontages still on this
Right.
lot.
Item number 5, 34403BZ, 2777 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn.
I have to say, with a lot of perseverance on the part of our project manager, we now has, as of January 10th, small business services sign off on the rear yard and signage on this New York City-owned waterfront lot. That took a lot of pushing, so thanks to Tony and to Veronica. We did receive a firm map on this one, and obviously the site is in a flood zone since it's exactly adjacent to the water. But as this is an extension of term and no expansion of the previously approved building is contemplated, I don't think at this point we need a ZRD1, CCD1, because there isn't anything for the building department to look at. It's all the same. Anybody else?
New cases, item number 6, 27181BZ, 11012 West 56th Street, Manhattan.
We have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials. The applicant provided proof of fire department inspection and approval of fire alarm and sprinkler in 2017, along with other monthly sprinkler inspection reports for 2017. I found that actually informative because they actually keep their monthly inspection reports, which you're supposed to have, and nobody else ever gives us those. So that is an interesting sort of additional information in general. Because this is a PCE operating in a residential building, though, I do think that the tenant should be notified by posting in the lobby and given an opportunity to submit testimony or attend the hearing. They could do that really quickly. I don't know that there's been complaints, but you never know. And I think, you know, we're going to make that a requirement of all the PCEs that are operating in residential buildings, existing PCEs. Anybody else on this?
Are the hours the same as what was in the last resolution?
Ah, okay. I have the hours here, but I didn't write down what the last.
I have the 5:30 to 11, Monday to Friday, Saturdays and Sundays, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. That was
in the resolution? No, so it's Monday to Friday, 5:30 to 11, Saturday, 8 to 9, and Sunday, 8 to 6.
Oh,
That's different.
okay, so it's actually less on
Yeah.
Saturdays and Sundays.
Okay. All right.
Item number 7, 17609BZ, 230-236 West 28th Street, Manhattan.
I recuse from this?
So this is an extension of term. Extension of time, I'm sorry. It was first initially granted in 2009, and extension was granted in 2014 till January 2017. And now the applicant is requesting additional extension, and the cause for it is there were changes to the budget was not in line, and that resulted in additional requirements that requires revision to the plans. So do you have any comments on it? No.
Well, it says that they are currently working on resolving their 13 open DOB violations
Yes.
and 7 open ECB. So how much time do they expect they need to resolve it?
That was one of my questions. It wasn't clear from the application as to the time frame that would be needed, so I would like the applicant to explain that in terms of how much time that would be needed to. And also there were requirements for various environmental review, and I'm assuming those would only start once the construction starts, so if a clarification to that also be provided.
And if they could tell us how much time that they actually need to
right.
complete
Yeah,
and get a
the whole
CO.
time period,
Yes.
right, yes. Yeah.
Good? Ready? Item number 8, 30409BZ, 81-111 Junior Street, Brooklyn. Is that right?
Okay, we have proof of initial service to officials, and no notice of hearing is required for extensions of time to complete. Community Board 16 did not submit a recommendation. We will need a preliminary firm map, although I do understand that the project is 75% complete, and it's probably not in a flood zone, because I checked my DFE site.
But you still need a firm map.
Yeah, we still need a firm map just to
Right, no, just make sure.
turn everything, tie up,
Right, you send them an email.
tie things up. The applicant did also get a DEP notice to proceed, which was a condition of the prior grant, so I don't see any issues. Anybody else?
Okay.
Okay.
Item number 9, 299-12BZ, 40-56 10th Avenue, Manhattan. This is an extension of time.
We have proof of service of initial application to officials, and again, no notice of hearing is required for extensions of time to complete. The statement of facts and photos are from August, so I'd like to know what the status of construction is today. We also need proof that the project is currently in compliance with the conditions of the grant with respect to LP's, the Landmarks Preservation Commission's HABs documentation of the demolished buildings, and OER's approval of the RAP and CHASP, et cetera. There was an E designation placed on this site, so that means OER was in charge of that. Anybody else?
Appeals calendar decision items, item number 10, 2016-4348A through 2016-4353A. This is 57th Avenue, Queens, and I hope to get fire department correction letter sign off today.
Okay, so they were supposed to submit some modifications to the drawings, and I didn't see anything. This was like we last heard this just on January 9th, and we put this on a space on this calendar because there was going to be a fast turnaround of drawings.
Check the drawer, I got a set of drawers, I'll check it.
I didn't find anything in the folder. Did anybody else?
No, they did submit a revised plan which showed the location of the
Yeah.
fire hydrants and the...
Oh, they did?
And there was
Yeah.
note on the,
They submitted it when?
the last submission, 01643.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't see it at all, so.
I have that in my notes as well.
That they were supposed to make changes, or that they submitted something?
I have submitted revised plans and
Yeah.
BPP, okay.
Oh,
That's what I
okay.
have.
Yeah, so these are the revised plans that were submitted. That
Okay,
shows
all
the-
right, I'll look at them, I didn't see them when I looked. Okay, so what they were supposed to modify was notes that said the buildings are fully sprinklered, show fire hydrant locations and street trees on the BPP and the BSA plans, and that was it. And then we were going to have fire department take a,
I received an email from the fire department this morning, they said they hope to have the letter today.
Okay.
Of all the transition and everything.
okay. All right.
Item number 11, 2017-264 BZY, 23 East 39th Street, Manhattan.
A preliminary firm was submitted, the site is not in a flood zone, and really this is Commissioner Shato, the one who asked for more clarity on the foundation work. Did you take a look at those?
Yeah, I did. We need them to submit a plan, foundation plan, showing that which part is done and what is the progress.
Right, they did that.
They did?
Yes, that's the question. You didn't see that?
No, I didn't see it.
Okay, so please look at the last submission.
I'll do it right now.
Okay, because it's colored colored drawings where they colored in and they used different codes to indicate what was done on which day and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Okay. You have it? Okay, so he'll look at it, and maybe we'll come back to it if he's had a chance to say anything. Okay. Okay.
Okay, continued hearing items. Item number 12, 16-15A, 233, 235 Water Street, Manhattan. This is a case that was off calendar. They had submitted a letter of an adjournment, withdrawal. It's just that we have to put it on for official withdrawal.
Right, okay.
Item number 13, 205-15A through 214-15A, Hook Creek Boulevard and Fortune Way, Queens. We have an adjournment request.
Right.
Item number 14, 2017-143A, 2532 44th Street, Queens. This is a building department revocation case.
I don't know what's going on with this case.
This is the one where they agreed.
Yes,
I'm not
that's
going to
what I mean.
confuse
We don't
this
have
one.
any submissions, we don't have anything, I don't know what's happening.
Building department's going to come and update us on this one. I think this is the one with the appellant agreed, the owner agreed to convert back.
Yes. No, so there are two sites. One, the owner agreed to convert back to two-family, and the other, the owner was going to file a variance application.
That's not this one. This one's where they agreed to convert back. They are in the process, and Buildings Department will give us an updated
But
status.
this is two addresses.
Right, they're two separate
2532
homes.
and 2530. They're both on the same calendar day.
Yeah.
Same calendar.
So last time they were heard in September 26th, they were heard together, and you
Yes.
asked if they be separated.
Oh,
So now they are.
They're two separate buildings.
They weren't separated on the
calendar, they're
calendar,
together.
they're still together.
No, I haven't even said they were
I
separated.
did mine this morning, and maybe it's been, I'm sorry.
We did them a long time ago, we had them separated.
Well, they're not separated on the calendars that we're using.
At some point, they were not separated.
Yeah,
So-
when I noticed they were not separate, I had Muriel separate them and send out another email with
Okay,
revised
so-
lineup. Okay. And so the building department will update us on this one. They have some approvals, they're waiting for some final approvals on these.
So the one that was separated out is no longer, so it's an A case that, what happens to it? What happens to it? Do they withdraw the A case? Because that one, apparently, they're going to be filing for a variance.
No, that's the next,
That's the next one?
that's
And
2530.
that's 2017-144A, 2530 44th Street?
I understand, but it's still an A case.
Right, but it's still an A case, but once the applicant files the variance, it's still Buildings Department's application. So if the applicant's going to continue to file the variance, but it's still, I guess if,
So DOB will have to request a withdrawal?
yeah.
No, but they can't withdraw unless a variance is granted, right? So in which case, then it's a revocation of the C of O
It's
for
kind of
that
like East
case.
11th Street, kind of just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you keep saying it's the next one, but none of us have
Sorry,
it
I know.
on
I
there.
apologize.
So we're looking at it
That was
together.
resent to you, everybody.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Okay. Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 16, 224-14BZ, 225-14A, 1534 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island.
Okay. As requested, compliance with section 25-624 and -66, which are the 4-foot high dense planting and 6-foot to be 6 foot high within 3 years screening on the parking lot from the street and the adjacent property was added to the plans. However, there's a little chart on the collection of plans that's sort of just lying there that refers also to section 37-921. And that one requires a 7-foot wide planting strip, which they show on the drawings without citing to the section. So they really should cite to the section, so it's clear that we get a 7-foot wide planting strip. We also don't have a planting plan that indicates the types of planting and the spacing. It just says planting, and so our standard is that we actually get a landscaping plan. It also isn't clear that there will be a fence separating the residential drive and the other adjoining properties from the parking area. And I think that there really needs to be, where there's planting, it can be open picket fence, and then the planting functions as the screen. But otherwise, I'm actually concerned that we're going to end up having parking bleed onto the lot that may or may not be developed for residential use. And then we had also open questions about compliance with zoning section 25-624B. They did provide calculations for coverage by driveways and parking. They provided that coverage and is within, but they didn't address some of the other criteria of that same general section with respect to curb cuts and maneuverability, and also the density factor that Commissioner Shanda mentioned at the last hearing. It's 2850 is the density factor for this site, and also section 2332 for minimum lot area and lot width, which applies to multiple buildings on a zoning lot. And there's a lot of criteria there that are quite complicated, so we need to make sure that the premise upon which this is based is actually a doable project as of right, in terms of the residential. I also want to make very clear that the tax lot line between the two houses can never be fenced or have a curb in the middle or anything like that, and that cross easements need to be created between the two homeowners to allow access to the full 30-foot wide driveway and the frontage space. And that needs to be a condition and also shown on the plans to be very clear, because otherwise it undoes the whole purpose of the fire department access. The notes on the drawings also refer to a GCL waiver for the houses. No GCL waiver is being requested through any of these applications, so we need to clarify that this application does not include a GCL waiver.
There's a GCL waiver in the project description.
Right. There is, but not for...
And there are two cases. One is for variance and one is for GCL.
Oh, there is?
Victory Boulevard, yeah.
No, I know it's Victory Boulevard. Where's it? Never. Also companion. So it's a GCL 35. That's no, not a bed of the map street. This is about, that's what it is. So that has to do, it has to do with inadequate frontage of those two homes.
So you're saying they don't have, they need a GCL 36?
Yes, I believe they need a GCL 36 because they're not fronting on a map street, and though they will comply with the building code because they have that 30-foot frontage area, they don't comply with zoning. Or, sorry, with GCL 36.
So we're reopening this? Are we reopening?
What?
Are we reopening this?
No, I'm just saying, nobody's asked for a GCL 36, so to write it on the drawing and say something to the effect of, GCL, and not have applied for it, we have to be clear on the drawings that we have given no GCL waiver unless they apply for one. They've never applied for one.
So they've applied for a GCL 35. You're saying they don't need a 35, they need a 36?
Now, they may need a 35 because the question is whether the parking lot and all that stuff is in the bed of a map street, which apparently it is, but I don't know. I no longer remember without looking at the drawings, but it's not a GCL 35 that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the houses that are way up on the flag having no access or inadequate frontage under GCL 36.
Okay.
All right.
Can we go back to case 11?
Yeah, just a sec, we have to finish this one, okay?
Sure.
Also, we need a parking management plan and a parking attendant to ensure that this area is properly managed. So I think one of the really big issues about this site is that nobody's managing the parking, so it's full of chaos on the site. So even though it's going to increase the parking to 21 spaces, that doesn't mean they're not going to park 45 cars there and have essentially the same chaos as they had before. So there really needs to be a management plan that's part of this story, which is, I think, one reason why the neighbors are so upset about it. Anybody else on this? They submitted financials?
They did, and I had signed off on the financials the previous hearing, but they submitted it and also revised the statement to be in line with the findings in terms of return for the B finding and the E finding, to be in line with the financial statement, and so it is.
I just want to go back to the GCL 36. So we are asking them to verify whether a GCL 36 would be needed for the residential? Then are we not opening?
They never applied for a GCL 36. It's not before us, right? Now, whether they could amend it really quickly or any of those things, that's a procedural question that I don't want to have
No,
here.
you'd have to get a...
Right?
they'd have to
But
get
they
a
have never
GCL.
actually asked for that. The GCL 35, they asked for it, even though I wasn't actually even sure they needed it, because we have other cases where you have parking in the bed of a map street and they don't get the GCL 35 for that. It's only when you have a building in the bed of a map street. And I don't think their existing building sits in the bed of a map street, and anyway, it's an existing building. So I'm not sure whether or not they really need the GCL 35, but way back then, I think they said that they did. So I think they were being cautious.
And they probably never applied for the 36 because the homes evolved after at a later
Yes,
date. And they just never went back to DOB.
Right, because the initial application was in a gigantic parking lot,
yeah.
right? So that's where I go back, and they may need to come back here for 36, or that's whatever. They just never applied. Okay.
I just want the drawing to have a note saying that the residential buildings on, I think I'd asked of it, and I'm not sure if it's there in the plan or not, that the buildings, residential buildings 1 and 2 would be complying with all the zoning regulations.
Yeah, but
In terms of the bulk and the height.
sure, but I wanted more than a note, because the premise upon which they are making their financial argument is that only two houses can be developed. They can only be of X size because of the various regulations. And as a result, they can't make an adequate return, therefore they need more from the medical, right? That's the premise. So if 2 houses can't even be built, that's not the correct premise, right? So that's why and in addition to which, there's curb cut restrictions and things like that have to do with, there's rules about parking lots and how many curb cuts you can have and all that sort of stuff. And so if those things haven't been studied, and I suspect they haven't been because this was not the original project they came here with, then some of them may also need to be waived. There may be more waivers that are actually needed, and so I don't know that anyone's looked at this. And rather than saying that it should just comply, which it always needs to do, it's different when it affects the premise.
Okay.
So what do we,
Okay,
go on?
Item number 17, 2017-215 BZ, 900 3rd Avenue, Manhattan.
This is a decision case?
We have a letter from the fire alarm installation company. It's not an affidavit, though. I don't know if any of that matters. And an affidavit from the sprinkler installation companies, both stating that they, both equipment has been installed and is operational. And until, I know we're having a fire department liaison get started again soon, so.
He should be here tomorrow, and he'll.
Okay, so, you know, in this case, it's a decision case, but going forward, we'll have fire department back in the conversation. Okay.
Continued here, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
Let's go
sorry.
back to
I apologize.
that other one.
What case do you want to go back to? The
11.
BZY?
11, yeah,
Okay,
2017-264.
right. We're going back to item number, appeals calendar, item number, decision item number 11, 2/2017-264 BZY, 23 East 39th Street, Manhattan.
Yep, so I see on January 17, they submitted two plans, one for the SOE and the other one for the foundation. The SOE indicate, the plan with the SOE indicate that the SOE is almost finished. It's coming with a letter from the geotechnical engineer who inspected the work. In addition to that, the foundation plan is coming with the letter from the same engineer indicating that substantial part of the foundation is already in ground, so I believe these two documents are okay.
Okay.
So we're good.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, back to the zoning calendar, continued hearing items, item number 18, 17414 BZ, 820 East 182nd Street, Bronx.
Say there were drawings submitted without a cover letter, so I actually wasn't sure what they were responding to.
I think it's being adjourned.
Being adjourned? No. Is this being adjourned? Why?
It's on the journal.
Drawings were submitted.
Which one?
174-14,
I thought he was being adjourned, John.
late submission maybe, but it's not in the adjourned
No.
folder.
And there was no adjournment letter.
I thought it was being adjourned. I thought so, because I don't.
Although they didn't have their submission in 20 days before.
But we might, yeah. So I'm not really sure what's happening with this, but I reviewed the materials, so they should
They were adjourned.
at least respond.
Okay.
So there's no adjournment letter, and there's no notation in the folder that it's being administratively adjourned, so that's why there needs to be that notation in the folder, or we don't know what's going on. So anyway, they submitted drawings. We asked for elevations of the building to show the signs and for signage calculations, to show that they comply with the zoning resolution. They didn't do that. The lighting diagram indicates there are several floodlights that they describe as, quote, not working. I don't understand what the point of a plan showing stuff not working is. To be clear, and then there's also a lighting narrative that they provided, but that information really needs to be on the plan, and lighting levels need to meet code and best practice requirements for the use, but also must not spill onto adjoining properties. That's the point of the diagram. The dumpster needs to be in an opaque enclosure, and the lot line between the UPS boxes and the residential neighbor needs a fence with screening or maybe landscaping. I mean, I couldn't really tell what the distances were between things, and whether having a little in-ground planting area might work there, because it's pretty nasty what those people look on the back of. The residents who are just adjacent. We need photos to see the condition of the property after the enclosure and screening is built and the extraneous signs removed. There are all these banners, all this other stuff in addition to the signs. They provided us also with proof that they're paying for one of their permitted signs, but there's just one permitted sign as far as I could tell, and we don't know which one it is. So that's a problem with those sign permits. They don't identify the sign. The sign should be numbered or something, so you know which sign they're talking about. At the last hearing, we recommended that the applicant obtain a sample set of drawings so that these can be used as a model. It doesn't appear that that was done here, and it really needs to be done, because I think the applicant is spinning its wheels because it doesn't know how to do this. And we have so many model packages that they could use, and they just need to make the effort and go get a model. But the mini mart was removed from the drawings, which was one of the things we discussed. So everybody else, take a look. Okay. Go on.
Item number 19, 30214BZ, 4504 Francis Lewis Boulevard, Queens.
Okay. They requested an adjournment. So we last heard this in October. This application has been in hearing since July of 2016 with 3 adjournments. This would be the 4th and 4 hearings. So I think we really need to finish this case up, whatever the outcome. So the next hearing date will be the last, whether it's adjourned or whether it's heard. And we will close and vote on that day, because you can't have an application that's been just sort of not going anywhere for all this time. Okay.
Item number 20, 33214BZ, 2912 Avenue N, Brooklyn.
Okay, they submitted on January 16th, just, so that was recent. I think that was permitted by us. Corrections were made to the drawings as requested. The second floor joists will remain in place. Dormer and attic notes were added or corrected. The roof height was brought down by 1 foot to 34 feet by reducing the height in the attic to 9'9". Since all of the houses on this side of the block, as shown in the streetscape, are 32 feet, we asked that the applicant justify the height difference with neighborhood character info, but we didn't receive that. The FAR, so we need that. That was the whole point. The FAR study for the R2 district, in which most of the lot sits, shows 3 houses in the radius with 1 FAR, with an anomaly that is much higher than that, but it's probably incorrect data. People rely on this Pluto data, which has a lot of inaccuracies. Across Avenue N, though, from the site, in the R4 district, so this is directly across the street, there are 5 houses in the 1 FAR range, so it seems that it's justifiable because of those nearby neighbors. So they really just need to get us to the 34-foot height with the neighborhood character information. Anybody?
I just want to add to it, in the statement of fact on page 4, the applicant states that, as you mentioned, the 5 buildings already have an FAR of 0.96 or above, and another 4 could increase their floor area ratio into the similar fashion without a discretionary approval. I'm not sure how one arrives at that, and so I would like that to be clarified.
So they say that there are 5 buildings already with greater floor FAR than allowed, and that they could increase it further?
No, and another 4 could increase another 4 buildings could increase their floor area ratio in a similar fashion without a discretionary approval. So I would like the applicant to clarify that statement.
Is it because they think it's predominantly built up? Is it in the R4? Is that why?
No, this is in an, it's partial, it's R2, R4 split. So
Right, I mean, the homes that they're talking about could be in the R4.
So that needs to be.
5, right? So
Yeah.
it could be the 5 across the street in the R4.
Yeah.
that she's referring to.
Right.
I'm not questioning the 5, I just don't know where the other 4s are, that could, and if they are in the R4 district, that needs to be clearly
Right.
stated in the document. It's not, there isn't any graphics that.
Okay. Move on? Okay, yeah. Yes, no?
Yes. Item number 21, 15715BZ, 3925 Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. The submission makes a verbal argument in favor of the 25-foot second floor rear yard encroachment without submitting any images or visual data to support it. So I personally can't review something that's just based on a narrative unless there's visuals and maps and so on to back it up. So they had access to those visuals. We don't. The requested FAR increase, according to the most recent zoning calculation sheet, is still 1.15, which we said before is too much. However, it relies on a claim that the .86 FAR was an existing, presumably legal non-complying condition. I don't see how this is possible, given that the 1995 permit to enlarge the building was for 250 square feet, and it was a permit to enlarge a building legally, which does not get you up to .86 FAR. The notation on the PW1 for that application indicates there was also an enlargement at the front, and this brings into question the legality of the non-complying 9'7" front yard, and the possible illegal vertical and horizontal extensions on the non-complying side yards. So we need the approved DOB drawings from 1995 showing the legal conditions at the time of that approval. And that's the base from which we go. And the height of the enlargement was reduced from 34 to 29 feet, so that's good.
So you need the 1995 approved DOB plans?
Yes.
Is that what you want? Okay, so I'll email them. Okay.
Anybody else?
Item number 22, 2016, 4181BZ, 1981 East 14th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, I don't know if they submitted anything on this, but they requested an adjournment till just next week, and that's not enough time. So anyway, they requested an adjournment.
Item number 23, 2016, 4218BZ, 66 79th Street, Brooklyn. Oh, sorry, good.
The cover letter states that the proposed floor area went down in this submission, but the zoning calculations on the drawing show it went up slightly, 71 square feet, and the FAR went up by .02 FAR. There's actually an error in the calculations since the proposed floor areas actually don't match. There's also an error in the note about the distance from the rear yard line and the rear wall setback. However, I do want to compliment the structure of the zoning calculation sheet, which is extremely well laid out and clear. And I actually, as we see submissions from different architecture offices, I'm starting to want to use those as models. So this is a calculation sheet I'd like to use as a model. We also have a demolition sheet on another project that should be used as a model. So we're going to create those models and include them in our website. The second floor was pulled back 12 feet from the existing front wall line to create a terrace, but now as a result of that, less than 50% of the existing walls at the exterior are being retained, and demolition drawings show that none of the joists at the first and second floor are being retained. So we have a threshold question right there. The FAR study doesn't shed any new light on the discussion. There are no houses on the social block with FARs in the .85 range, although there are a few houses in that range or greater around the corner. I'd like to know, so this is again about the failings of Pluto data, when it's telling a story that seems extreme or when it's telling a story that doesn't seem to really reflect what you see in the neighborhood. It's possible that the data is flawed. So they should be looking at, they should be looking a little deeper, like at the Department of Buildings filings. And in the cases of some of those houses that they showed, because they're on plinths, Pluto may have included those levels as floor area, and in this application, it's being considered a cellar, so it's not apples to apples. The wall height was reduced by 2 feet, but the overall height to the peak was reduced by only 1 foot. VSA zoning calculation sheet is incorrect with respect to the total height. It says it's 33'11". That's not correct. It's 35'11". The side walls no longer penetrate the required side yard setbacks, which was a problem before, although both zoning calculation sheets are inconsistent with the elevation on this point. The house is still 10 feet or more higher than its neighbors, and that's according to the streetscape elevations and photo montage. And the aerial perspective appears to exaggerate the difference since 2 levels of windows are visible above the roof line of the neighbor. So this house is really towering over the neighbors. So I'm not sure how you justify the extreme height difference as not having an impact on neighborhood character. Perhaps more research into actual building heights above curb level rather than Pluto data also in this case, and treating the 3rd floor as an attic in terms of design vocabulary, which is much more typical on the block. So right now it's being treated as a floor architecturally. If it were treated as an attic with a peak, that looks much more like what's going on in the neighborhood. Maybe that would work. And then the west side yard depth increased by about 1 inch, and the rear yard depth increased from a complying 42 feet to a complying 46'8" to 47'9". Although on the elevation, there's even a different rear yard depth, so they need to coordinate the dimensions on all of the materials. So there's room to obviously expand into the rear yard. That would bring down the building height, for example, but I don't know if in terms of planning, that's what they want to do. It's just so unusual for us to see such a big rear yard retain. And the plan should clarify whether any walls at the attic level are being retained. Anything else?
No, I actually felt that this is like a give and take of the building is pushing its massing away from the front, trying to ensure that the massing does not read like a 3-story building on the front. So by setting the 2nd story back, it actually it minimizes its presence on the front. And because of that, the building in the rear has a little bit of a higher height, but then it is well within the 30-foot rear yard. It has a much wider rear yard. So I felt the revision that the application provided was a better response to the community issue. So you still read a 1st floor, which is very defined in that neighborhood, and then there's a setback of 12 feet on the 2nd floor, and the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor kind of rises from that, so which does reduce the visual height of it. I felt it was okay.
But so maybe the problem is that all the material that's being submitted is looking at the building in these artificial ways. So
right.
Bird's eye view and also a flat elevation.
Right.
And maybe what we really need is a perspective drawing from eye level to see how visible that is, because it's not set back that far. It's only set back 10 feet. So
12 feet. It's set back 12 feet.
Well, okay, yeah, it's set back 12 feet. But that's, you know, in the realm of things, it's not that far when you're dealing with a 10-foot height differential between that and its neighbors. So the question is, at what point does it seem to recede into the distance where it's, you know, the thing that's great about, for instance, in Manhattan, where you've got all these penthouses, a lot of the times you can't figure out whose building the penthouse belongs to, because it's set back so far from the street line that it kind of blends in with all the other stuff that's going on the rooftops. That's much harder to do in a neighborhood where you've got uniformity across the roof lines. And so there is a point where from the street, you either won't see this or you won't be able to figure out what's going on. And so maybe that's what they need to study to make the case. Because for me, at this point, I see a bird's eye view and this thing towering over it and an elevation with it towering over
the elevation,
neighbors.
I agree. The elevation doesn't do justice. I felt, I mean, first of all, the building is set back more than 15 feet from the front yard, and then there is that additional setback of 12 feet above the 2nd floor. I felt that definitely abates that visual encroachment. So I agree, the graphics doesn't do justice in the way it's shown.
Yeah, so I mean, it looks really tough. Yeah, and the setting back, all the houses are set back, so that doesn't distinguish, that's part of the thing is, had the other houses all been forward, close to the street line, And then you could argue whether that fits within neighborhood character too. But then let's just say this house sets back really much further than they do. Then it's sort of tucking itself behind the other houses. But in this case, if they line up, their street lines are all lined up, and then there's this 12-foot setback of this tall thing. So, and then sometimes we see a setback and a setback, which is another way of dealing with it, where the second floor is set back the 12 feet, and then the third floor sets back further. But when you look at the vocabulary also, this third floor is really being treated like a floor, and that's not part of the vocabulary in the neighborhood. Everybody else, many of these houses have this third level, but it's an attic if they read truly as attics. So more typically we see attics with dormers and that kind of thing. That's how it reduces the apparent height. Something needs to be, there needs to be more done for me to persuade me that it's not going to be something where you can see it from several blocks away.
Okay, item number 24, 2016-4274BZ, 114 11 39th Street, Brooklyn.
No, it's 1411.
Sorry, 1411 39th Street, Brooklyn.
They're requesting adjournment.
And this goes along with item number 25, 2016-4339BZ, 5018 14th Avenue, Brooklyn.
Also requesting an adjournment.
They're adjourned to March. Item number 2016-4276BZ, 333 Johnson Avenue, Brooklyn.
Also requesting an adjournment.
Item number 27, 2016-4295BZ, 1074 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, this one we continue to have a threshold question. I still don't see that 50% of the existing perimeter walls are being retained at the perimeter, or that 50% of the floor joists are being retained. The diagrams show the entire second floor is being removed and only one wall retained at the perimeter. The cellar walls don't count as floor area. The section shows that this is a total demolition except for some of the first floor. So in this case, we do have a model demolition set, and I want this applicant to provide demolition drawings, which they should know. You know, if you file at the Department of Buildings, what we receive is not a demolition set. The Buildings Department would just toss it right back at you. So we want a real demolition set so we can really understand what's going on, what's being retained, what's being removed. FAR was apparently reduced to 1. I presume that's because of the limited height in the attic and setting back the rear yard incursion from 20 to 22 feet. With respect to the incursion into the rear yard, given that there's a 5-foot head clearance at the attic level, I don't see any reason at all for that portion to rise without setback at the 22-foot incursion point, and should be the roof. That should be the roof of the second floor instead. So keeping bringing much at the rear. The front could also happen like that, because both of them are 5-foot head heights on the front and the back. So there isn't really any reason for either side to be so tall. However, in the front, they can justify, because if they really want it, though I don't really understand why they want it, in the front you can justify it because the height of the building is consistent with neighborhood heights. Also, the BSA approved drawings for lot 70, that it's 2 doors away from the subject, show a 22-foot rear yard at the first and second floors to approximately 21 feet above grade, and a setback porch at the attic floor that creates a complying rear yard condition at that floor. So if you're going to use that as what's going on the block, they were more respectful of the rear yard condition. There's room, I note that there's room also to pull back at the second floor to at least 25 feet at the rear. The neighbor to one side is shown on the site plan with a 28-foot rear yard, and to the other side with a 20-foot rear yard, so that would be a compromise between 28 and 20, of having 25 feet at the second floor. And then you're at least allowing the guy with the almost complying rear yard to have a little more open space. Any other?
I just had a little bit of concern with the way the attic plan has been laid out. The attic plan, has these varying heights, and in the middle, the height of the attic rises to 9 foot 6 inches, and whereas the rest of the height is kept at 7 foot 11 and
Or 5 feet.
or 5 feet. So, it wasn't clear why these various heights were being maintained. There should be one uniform height, and that can bring the height and some of the floor area also down. That 9 foot 6 inches is not is adding to the floor area. So that was,
Well, but otherwise then it's not an occupiable attic. So the whole idea is that center portion at 9.6, which really doesn't need to be 9.6, it could be 8.
it can be 8, and it can
Right.
still be a floor area and still serve whatever it is serving.
Right.
From the structure, it didn't seem like that. It was the structure of the building that was causing that bump
No.
up.
It's their effort to, well, for one, they have a double height bedroom that creates this, that has this cathedral ceiling.
Right.
So that pops up the floor above the bedroom in the attic. So that's why you have to go up some steps to get, when you're in the attic, to get above the cathedral ceiling. So,
No, you don't even have to. There's no access above the cathedral.
No, there is, it's a crawl space. They have a
Right,
little,
it's a
so
crawl
that, the
space.
problem is that they actually have access in that attic area, and as opposed to just treating that as the roof of the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of the problem of the apparent height, especially at the rear. The front, I also think instead, why don't you do a balcony or something like that? But in the front, they can justify the height because of the neighborhood. Yeah, but it is. It's a very, you're always taught in architecture school, if the section is weird, you need to go back and redesign your project. The section here is extremely weird, but you don't see the building from the section. Anyway. Yep.
Item number 28, 2016, 4467BZ, 6925 Astoria Boulevard, Queens.
Indeed. Okay, they provided deed materials, but it's a little tricky, and I think the cover letter admits that it's tricky. They refer to blocks 89 and 1139, but the site is actually on block 1001. They did provide an old map, or at least a little section of an old map showing that the block used to be known as Block 89, bounded by Astoria Boulevard and Hazen, but there was no old map provided to show that this was ever Block 1139. And the statement of facts confirms the inability to prove the lot's configuration prior to at least 1949. Furthermore, many of the deeds provided are illegible, so they need to be transcribed for us to be able to use them. Maybe the title company gave them a transcription, but we can't figure out what they said. So while I don't find the 1949 data referred to in the statement of facts, there is a 1954 deed for Block 1001, Lot 21, that conveys from New York City to Collins Advertising, but the metes and bounds of it are illegible. By at least 1954, erection of advertising signs within 200 feet of an arterial were prohibited. So the claim here is that the sign was erected in the 1930s based on a ground sign permit. It isn't clear whether this is the same sign that existed in the 30s or at the time of the enactment of the arterial sign portion of the 1916 zoning resolution, since structural alteration was prohibited actually under the 1916 zoning resolution as amended. By 1961, the zoning resolution allowed only an 8-year amortization period, actually, and that was amended in 1963 to increase it to 10 years. The urban design analysis that was provided uses the wrong no action and with action condition. No action is the removal of the sign from the lot and leaving the lot vacant.
No action.
with action is the sign as proposed. An alternative is construction of a commercial use on the site. So that has to be corrected because that's not a correct no action or action. There is a statement in the statement of facts that the metal sign structure is authorized to remain on the property since it is a non-conforming use. I don't understand that at all. I need to explain that. With respect to the financials, I'll just say a little bit. The assumption is that there is no cost to install the sign and that the arrangement is a ground lease. I don't actually understand this approach in this case since the owner of the property is the sign company itself. It has costs just as the retail project would have costs if it was the retail property owner. So that's almost like saying you're going to do a net ground lease for a commercial property, and therefore the commercial tenant, ground lessee, is going to build the building. So either it seems to me you're not doing apples to apples in that case. Because then why don't we look at it that way? Let's just do it as a ground lease to a commercial tenant. Then we'll know what the rents are for ground leases for maybe even all the uses. Also, the Q90 sign is described as small, of limited effectiveness and limited revenue potential with an annual revenue of $61,000. So then I don't understand why it's being proposed here. It's small, limited, ineffective, and that's true also for the sign that's the Q11 sign, which they're going to reduce in size so as not anymore to encroach upon the neighbor's property. So why would you propose, something of limited this and limited that? I don't actually understand even the business model. The one-family home also is shown as having a positive return where income exceeds NOI, so why isn't that sufficient? And
You mean the value exceeds the cost?
Yeah.
Yeah, not NOI, it's sold. Isn't it sold?
This is sold. Oh, okay. So, but then that was my other question, then why can't it be a rental? Maybe it would do better as a rental unit. So, that's another question. And then the two-family and community facility are described as being as of right, which is correct. They're alternate variance scenarios. And with respect to income for commercial and community facility uses, the sellers aren't being included. And what if the community facility building were instead of use group 6 office buildings, so you have a broader tenant base? What about that? Because it's double the size of the retail building. Those were my comments.
I have a bunch of comments. First of all, the urban design documentation was inadequate. I was of the understanding we were also asking them to show how the existing sign will have a visual, the visual analysis of that, and in terms of the light spreads, and that was, in my thinking, was part of the urban design ask, and that was not provided. They cited...
maybe not today because this is abbreviated, but tomorrow if you could get more into detail about what you mean by that.
Sure.
Okay?
In the application, the applicant provided the past BSA resolution South Conduit. I read the review, and I don't see the there are some similarities, but the difference in the reasons for which South Conduit, the signage on South Conduit may have been granted, I think from a neighborhood context is very different than what we have here at Astoria. Astoria, you have a two-faced sign. Conduit was a one-face, and that was just facing Conduit Avenue. It was not casting this bright light on the residential portion of it. And that to me is a big difference. Here, Astoria Boulevard, the sign is almost perpendicular to Astoria, and it can therefore afford two signage, one for eastbound and one for westbound traffic on Grand Central. So there's a big difference, and if we were to use South Conduit as a basis, I would want this signage to be redesigned and reoriented.
Well, that's a possibility.
It should only be one face perpendicular almost to Astoria Boulevard, and the signage, the residential signage should be then eliminated.
But can I just say something with that? Because if you're talking about reorienting and rebuilding the sign, then you're no longer talking about a legalization. So we're talking about a variance here to allow a sign in a residential neighborhood. So that's a totally different, once you start altering the positioning of the sign and the size of the sign, then it's almost like we're granting a variance for a sign. That I have more of a problem with than legalizing, even though I have a problem with legalizing. I have a problem with both of them, let's get it clear. But to me, once you start saying, well, now let's just rebuild this, then you're totally like wiping out the history of the reason why we want this here is because it's pre-existing for so many years. Now we are kind of authorizing you to now rebuild it to our specifications. That to me is even more of a problem.
So part of what you're saying, though, is because the argued hardship is the history of use.
Yeah.
If you tear it down and you start again with a redesign, then you don't have the historical use to rely on.
Right, then it's a whole new thing, and why would we ever allow somebody to have a variance for a sign in a residential neighborhood? The only part of this argument that, to me, that has traction, if it were to have traction, would be the fact that it's been there forever, and, to do anything else, because of the history of development, to do anything else would be too costly and you wouldn't get a return. So that's my problem with that statement of let's rebuild it and now make it this and that and make it conform to conduit.
I agree. I wouldn't want to go that route, but I think since they cited the South Conduit, I see a big difference between the...
I agree with you there.
Why that was granted, why in this case, I don't think we can take South Conduit as a way to analyze
Right, but
this
so I
project.
don't think the resolution to that is to reformulate this sign so
Fair
it
point.
conforms with conduit that we are saying is
point.
not like this case
You're
to
just
begin with.
distinguishing it because of its
Yeah.
orientation, and in South Conduit, it was also the legalization of a sign.
Right.
Right, so it was standing there, the same exact sign, all that stuff,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The what? Now, this is a question I have regarding the financials. In one of the statements, it says that there are high risks and uncertainties associated with outdoor signs that are affecting the returns, and it was not clearly spelled out, and I would like clarification on what that is. And if it is, why build it?
Well, they actually do explain it, but I disagree with it. They do have a lengthy explanation about the volatility of the income stream, but that doesn't mean risk necessarily, because there's other risks that are used to interpret a cap rate, not just whether or not the income stream is steady.
Okay. Now, in terms of the neighborhood character, the statement had, I'm just quoting the statement, it says, additionally, since the signage was erected in 1938, it has not impacted the ability of adjacent property owners to develop their property for residential commercial use. I question that statement because the kind of signage that were permitted or that could technically be built in 1930s is very different from what can be built today. Today you have LED panels, and those days it was just signs that were painted or posters that were pasted, and there was not much of lighting other than the uplighting of it. So we don't know what the actual size of the sign was also at that time. That's not been determined. So there were reasons why then what got built. But today, that sign is much bigger. It is much brighter. Sure, since it's an LED panel, it's going to be much brighter, and it is.
It isn't an LED sign. This is a print sign.
I think.
No. And the community board was very clear that it can't be an LED sign, and I would say the same. The sign is a sign, it's a poster sign, and that's how they measure it, right? That's why with LED signs, you don't have the same kind of restrictions on the proportions.
All right,
That the print poster signs have those restrictions.
Okay, I think I looked at it and it looked like but then I'm wrong.
But it does have probably more powerful lighting than in the 1930s, that
So
kind
that's
of thing.
one of the reasons I would like more of a visual study, which was required of the South Conduit, by the way. and I will go back and get into the specifics tomorrow on that.
So, and we're going to ask for a copy of the original application on South Conduit, so, the folder. Archives.
Yeah, I remember South Conduit, and I agree with you that the circumstances are different. Yes, the lot is larger, but the positioning of the sign, as you noted, was different. It was also a one-sided sign and not a two-sided sign, and we also instituted an awful lot of screening of the residential properties behind it, and there also was screening, natural screening in the form of trees that were blocking it, and we noted the distance from the building to the home to the lot line and the home to the sign, so it was very clear that we were trying to minimize the effect on the residential neighborhood behind them. Because this lot is smaller, it is almost impossible to screen against the residential. Between the size of the lot and the position of the sign and the fact that it's two-sided, you cannot screen, because I actually wrote, we should increase screening as, a matter, and then I went and I looked at the site, and I was like, you couldn't screen this if you wanted to, because the sign, first of all, is bigger than the site, and the positioning of the sign is where are you going to put trees or anything? There's no way to screen this. So it really does have a greater effect on the surrounding neighborhood than this does.
And that's one reason why the larger lot for Conduit was more amenable to that, because there was room to put the screening on the edge and allow the vegetation to grow to a height that would not be visible from the house.
Right, so it made the C finding in a way that this site could not meet the C finding, and I doubt will ever make the C finding, frankly. And you do have to make all 5 findings. So, I have also some financial comments. The largest comment has to do with the cap rate that they're using, that they tried to justify. As Commissioner Shonda had mentioned, they had said that the high cap rate was the result of the high risk, and they talked about the risk solely in terms of the volatility of the income stream. There are reports saying that it's rare that the signs are consistently leased throughout the year, and the vacancy rate is often as high as 40 to 50%. Well, that's only one factor that dictates the level of risk, and I actually think that that factor should actually be shown as a deduction against gross income in vacancy and collection, and not in the cap rate. The cap rate has to do with the risk of an investment set against safe investments like treasuries that have a very low return. And so I'm not necessarily sure that that's proven here. However, the loss in income can be shown in vacancy and collection, and you could still have a lower cap rate because it's 2 different things.
That effect also is like they have this lease-up time, they have other things like that. Isn't that figured into that? Here, there's no factor for lease-up time. Isn't it 0 on there?
Right, and there's no factor.
They're using a ground lease.
And they're using the entire leased income as their income. Right. So they're not talking about the fact that, okay, for half the year we may not get income. And I'm not even entirely sure I'm going to believe that either, because this sign is actually in a very prime location. Right. So that's also up in the air. But the key here is that the cap rate, because signs are so lucrative, and that's why everybody's trying to hold on to them. Why are they lucrative? Because there's almost 0 outlay, and all you're doing is getting income for something that you are literally not doing anything to maintain. If you're putting up the sign structure, that's a big if. Mm-hmm. The sign company is maintaining the sign structure and paying the electrical bill and every taxes and everything associated with it. You're just reaping rental income off of it without any laying out of any cost and no effect. Right. So I think that that's a very secure investment for a landowner to have. And so therefore, the cap rate should be lower to show that. Now, even using their own cap rate of 16% that they're trying to justify, the return on this investment is so incredibly high, it is ridiculous. It's over 200% return on the investment. How could they even argue that that's a minimum return? So on every level, I'm kind of like, they're nowhere near making B&E. And then, and I wanted to add to your comment about the single-family home sale, that's showing about a 3% return, very little return. But that's because it's a very tiny little house. So it seems to me that if you've got an as of right that's barely eking some sort of return out, 3%, very little, shouldn't you be asking for more space? Make it more attractive. Give us another floor. Make it larger. Right now, it's 560 or 580 square feet. Who in the world would purchase something like that as a house? But like you said, maybe you could rent it, but more importantly, maybe you can ask for some more floor area and sell a 1,000 square foot house.
So that would be the minimum variance.
Right, exactly. Especially since you're right on the cusp right now of having a suitable return.
Right.
I don't necessarily want to see a larger office building because I think that, or community facility, I think the floor plates are so constricted by having your staircase and your access, and the taller you go, more likely you're going to have elevator and those kinds of issues. You're going to have virtually no place to put anything except maybe 2 tables on each floor. So I don't know that that would ever go over well just from looking at the plans.
Right. I agree. No, not I mean, the 2 stories is what they proposed, right? So we have seen 2 stories without elevators to the second floor. I'm not sure really how that works with ADA requirements, but you know, it always has to do with whether you have an equivalency on the ground floor. If it was just, if it was use group 6 and not community facility, then you're not restricted to having only doctor's offices. It could be a law, you know, an accountant, lots of those kind of little tiny businesses that rent a small office, that kind of thing, the accountant, the real estate office, the kind of one-man law firm kind of thing. Those are the types of users you might see on the second floor with retail on the ground floor, as opposed to restricting it entirely to doctor's offices. But I have a question going back to this subject of this cap rate and all of that. If this is a ground lease, why is the cap rate even relevant? They've leased this out. They say in this case they're not even paying for the construction of the sign structure. And so it's simply they leased it out. So why is there a cap rate at all?
Because you're capitalizing the income they're getting. You're trying to figure out what the value is of this property, of this investment. So you're going to capitalize whatever income you're getting. So you're capitalizing the lease.
Okay. And then the next question is, why is it fair to assume that they don't build the sign structure when we often see signs where the property owner owns the structure and then they lease the panels, basically, to the outdoor advertising company?
I mean, we could say that they should add in some construction cost for the sign structure. It's going to be minimal, and I don't think that that's going to throw it one way or another in terms of making this extremely lucrative return look all of a sudden minimal, but we could do that. I mean, the fact of the matter is it's sign, it's minimal output and a lot of input, and it's a valueless site. I mean, a site that you could purchase for less than $100,000, that's like nothing. So anything you get from that is gravy, and big time gravy. So, you know, if you're adding construction costs of maybe $20,000 or whatever to it, because if you do that, in that case, if it's a legalization, then you're going to depreciate it a little, possibly, I don't know, we'll have to see what comes in. You're still talking about gravy that's coming in on a very small outlay of cash, $120,000. And I'd like to say that when this was first done, it's probably $100 for the land.
Yeah, sure, but we talk about today's cost.
No, I know, but so if today's cost, it's $100,000, maybe $20,000 for the structure, and you're getting, I don't know, what are they saying about at least $50,000 in income a year, I believe it is?
Yeah.
Because it's like $80,000, and then some of it's discounted for vacancy.
Right.
Or
but they actually gave us, I don't think it's relevant, but they gave us an estimate to demolish the sign, and that was $60,000. So that tells me, and we have a case where we have, you know, putting up a sign structure today would certainly cost more in the 100,000 or more range, right? Just because they have to put in footing. I mean, we're starting from scratch when we look at construction costs, right? So the footing is significant, the sign structure has to meet new code, not 1938 code.
Right, but in a way, are we looking at this as a legalization? Because if we are looking at it as a legalization, then we would go back to the legal condition, which is vacant land, and then the structure could be new, put in. However, this is a little more complicated than your typical legalization because it was legal when it was put in. And so if it was legal when it was put in, then what exists now is depreciated. So it's not going to be a brand-new sign structure that was put in at $100,000. It's going to be a depreciated sign structure.
But it's been illegal for almost 50 years. Doesn't that bring us to zero where it's not?
I mean, that's the complication with this case, because when it was put in, it was legal, and it has depreciated over time.
It's been fully amortized, this we know.
Right, I'm
Fully
just talking about
depreciated.
where you put it into the case in terms of
Yeah.
construction costs. Does it come in as separate construction costs, or does it come in as like an appendage to the land? In which case, that's how they did it. As vacant land with whatever's on it is worthless because it's depreciated.
Right.
Question.
Yeah.
I don't
But I mean, if
really
we-
know the answer
If
to
we,
that.
maybe that's something that we could look into, like board practice, and maybe consult with whoever it is you can consult with about. But because I'm just looking at legalizations of buildings, when we look at buildings, we're still looking at some sort of value of the structure that sits on that lot, right? We don't say the structure's here, we don't count it towards the expenses. We look at something, right?
It depends on
You look at
the,
the depreciated value of the structure that sits there. But if
Right.
there's no structure,
right, then you look at what it would be to build it new.
Right.
However, this was legal at some point, and it has deteriorated a lot since then. I think you would be giving them a gift to allow them to add it in as a brand-new structure. But even if you were at a cost of,
Okay.
let's say, $100,000, their return then drops to about 100% or
Wow.
75%. Then the question is also, you know, as another exercise, why does this have to remain as a two-faced sign?
right.
So that's another thing.
Especially with the
If
200% return.
if we get past A, B, and C and get to E, then that's the next question.
Okay. Interesting.
If I remember correctly, when the financials were first submitted, they both had construction costs and demolition costs, and, you know, we decided that they really had to pick one or the other, but demolition seemed more, I think, realistic, 'cause you know, because they...
Demolition seem more realistic in terms
Well,
of,
the sign was already there, right? So you would have to demolish it otherwise to...
So they use the demolition costs for the homes.
Right.
And for the offices.
They had construction costs for the sign and demolition costs, both. So originally, you guys never saw that version?
But
because it
not,
changed.
the current one
It
doesn't
changed.
have that.
No.
I don't think the current one, they have included the demolition cost.
yes,
into the analysis.
I don't know, but they gave us a demolition
I think that was a
support.
separate thing. So the analysis does not include the demolition cost. It says, however, if the single-family home, even though it
Yeah,
has a
that's right.
return, if you factor in the demolition cost, then the return will be negative.
Right, that was
That's
that
what
little
it has
side
stated
note.
as a footnote.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, I just want to remind everyone that, you know, there's another application here filed.
Yeah.
That's not in public hearing.
Oh.
Next, right down the road. So.
Yeah, yeah.
Just to remember, you know, the EAS is for this site and for that site.
Yeah, yeah, I
And
know.
now that in terms of, I guess, the financials, right now there are two financial reports for these sites, but, you know, we are looking at this under one EAS.
Oh,
Just throwing,
the two signs are under one EAS?
yeah, it's segmentation otherwise, that's,
It's under one ownership.
yeah.
Why is it segmentation?
Yeah, we,
They're not even associated sites. I don't understand. That's the secret officer's job, but I don't
Yeah,
understand
no,
why
we-
that's considered segmentation.
we just, yeah,
There was a discussion with.
Was a
Yes.
determination that was made at some
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so, well, not only am I aware that there's another sign down the street, I'm aware of other signs
Yeah.
in similar type lots there are a lot of them, because this is the kind of thing that was done by the sign industry way back then, especially with these. So, what's hard to figure out is New York City ends up taking control of these sites because they were in rem foreclosures, right? And then they start selling them off. So they'll sell, at that time, they just wanted to get rid of these things, right? So they subdivided them however anybody wanted. And if a sign company said, you know what, I don't really want something big, I just need a place to put my sign, then the city would have subdivided it like that, as long as the remaining site was a viable site, So I don't know if in 1954, when it was transferred by the city, that was what they did. There is, some of the maps show that maybe this little site existed earlier, but you never really know what the story is behind that. It's clear that it was probably created intentionally as opposed to a remnant from the actual remnant from the opening, the widening of the street, because you only see one or two other lots of that kind of configuration. So it's just not clear to me that it was left over, that was the remnant. It seems like it may have been a created little shape. I don't know. We just don't have.
No, I was looking at the documents that were provided from 1935. That particular configuration, just by other dimensions, has been listed twice.
But, right, it's listed twice, but it's the wrong block. It's 1139, this is block 1001, or lot 89.
Right.
So I don't have any way of knowing that list is related.
I was
to
just
the
going by
site.
the dimensions of the
that's what I
abutting
was
lots
doing.
and the current dimensions, so
Right.
it seemed it fell into the place.
Yeah.
Now, what are the chances there is another block with the same kind of dimensions?
it's
But
not.
at least from that point of it seemed. And one of them does show that it was connected with that dog leg of the residential building. That faces, what's the street?
Hazen.
Hazen
yeah.
Street. So that was back in 1935.
You're saying it's this one?
So there
No,
are
it's actually
two,
this
so
one.
this is the one.
Yeah.
But if you look at the dimension, this dimension and this dimension repeated similarly, and it's repeated again as a continuation of that property. And
So it
it's
might
the
have
same
been
McKean
But that's 1930 something.
Same
Yeah.
date, August 29, 1935, both of them.
Right.
So it's a little confusing also.
Okay, so clearly, we have a lot of problems with this site. So I'd say that the applicant, so we're talking about how the conduit case is really distinguishable from this case. They need to respond to their position on why they don't think it's distinguishable. But they need to really articulate, what I notice a lot with sort of this applicant community is they hand us a resolution and they say, look, it's the same. That's not how, if you were appearing in court, you would actually have to explain to the judge exactly how it's the same, right? Step by step by step. They never do that. They just hand us the resolutions and then say, here's proof. But it isn't proof without going through all the facts of the case. So, okay. Thank you, everybody. Next.
New cases on the zoning calendar, item number 1, 2016-4347 BZ, 1605 Oriental Boulevard, Brooklyn.
Okay, so we have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. The community board voted to approve with 2 opposed. We have 1 letter in support, and it is in a zone AE 11, flood zone. Huh?
They were requested to get a 0D1 and a CCD1.
Okay, good.
I didn't have them get the firm map though, does that need to be in the record?
The firm map is to prove that you're right. You can go get a ZRD1 and it turns out you're looking at an old firm, because by the way, all of these preliminary firms are being negotiated.
Yeah.
So yesterday's AE11 zone could be tomorrow's out of the zone zone. So that would be foolhardy not to be up to date with what your preliminary firm
Okay.
is. In addition, the statement of facts makes an argument that the project does not need to comply with Article 6, Chapter 4, because the building permit for the work, which I understand is being removed, and some of it which was built illegally, which is really confusing in this application, was issued prior to enactment of that section. So that part's a DOB call and needs to be clearly described in the ZRD1 request. But on the other hand, and then I really don't understand the argument in the statement of facts, it argues that it complies with Article 6, Chapter 4. So either it isn't, or it is, or it's sort of, and that's why now we ask for DRD1s and CCD1s on these. The history of the house is very complicated, so we need to be clear about what the pre-illegal construction house is that we should use as the base to determine the scope of the proposed enlargement and whether adequate existing building material is being retained. So they keep showing us these drawings for this house that doesn't exist there anymore, which they said was .27 FAR that had this little sort of like a watchtower, lighthouse. Yeah. It's kind of funny. And then they talk about a 0.27 FAR house, and then they talk about this 0.62 FAR house and 53% lot coverage, and there's no way there was a 0.62 FAR legal construction, but meanwhile they had an 11-foot rear yard, and on and on and on. And so there's no way that that's what was approved, and when you looked at the approved DOB set, everything complies with everything, and the second floor has this weird setback so that the side yards are compliant, and that seems to be what was built. So I don't actually see any of the non-complying 11-foot rear yard or any of that stuff. When you look on the Google aerial view, the house has lines, the back of the house lines up with the rear of all the neighbors. It has that sort of offset second floor, so it has complying side yards. So I actually don't know what's not complying about the house. So they're like trying to merge these two houses into one. And so to clear this up, we need a set of as-built drawings with the illegal construction, if there is any, shown to be demolished. The approved DOB plans, I've already said that they comply with the DOB set. And then we need an actual set of demolition drawings. What are you going to remove from this actual built building? And the building's already enclosed, and under DOB standards, that's floor area. So floor area is already in the building, in an enclosed existing building. So the way that I understand it is the building that you take a snapshot of today, that's our existing building that will be enlarged under 622.
Really? Not the original home, which is the one-story building, along with justification in terms of like a pre-enlargement survey from back then to show that the side yards and the front yards are where they say they are existing now? Because to me, it's like that DOB approved plans was never fully built.
Right.
So we've got a situation where you've got the original home, then you've got an illegal enlargement, then you have an attempt to correct that with DOB, but that never went through. It was only partially complete, and then you're now saying now we want to propose something new that's based on that. But shouldn't you be going back to?
Well, but then they don't qualify at all because the entire building was demolished.
Right. Oops, sorry.
Because when they lifted it, they didn't do a lift. They did a demo, right? So then we don't have any, because who would actually lift a bungalow that you're going to, it's concrete building now. When you
We've
look at
seen
it.
people lift bungalows.
Yeah, but in this case, the work was already done. So when they come to us, we say to them, you have a bungalow today, you're going to need to do tricky technique to lift your bungalow and build around it and underneath it and expand, but we need to see those walls retained. And they show us staging drawings to show how they're going to do that. In this case, it was lifted under what was then the Article 6, Chapter 5 rules, because it was lifted right after Sandy. It was lifted in 2013, right? So if they did a lift at all, I doubt there was much of a lift, because when you look at the building, it's entirely poured concrete. So where's the existing fabric? So I was just checking the language in 73-622, but I don't think there's a deadline by which the building has to have been built. It just says the word existing building. May permit an enlargement of an existing single-family residence. Okay, so you just need to be existing. And when you look at the photographs of this structure, it's built. So it's not like you can move in and you get a C of O because there's no electrical and there's no kitchen and all that stuff. But under Department of Buildings approach, the building, once it's closed up, it's considered floor area. And the building is fully enclosed, it just doesn't have windows. So we could, if you felt uncomfortable about that, get a determination from DOB. Anyway, they have to go for a Z or D1 anyhow, that this is an existing building. But, we've been struggling with what's the definition of an existing building. And so then we'd only be looking at, and I don't think there's any illegal construction on this building.
Okay, but your DOB plans, right, are showing a 9-inch side yard and a 4-foot 3-inch side yard, which shows a shifting, and then you're going back to your proposed with a 1-foot 2-inch side yard and a 4-foot 8-inch side yard, which is what the original bungalow had. So aren't you getting rid of walls and stuff that you had with your DOB plans? Or were you
if the building that's standing there today is the existing building under 73-622, the side yards that were, so you were allowed then to lift the building up and stay within the confines in the floor plate of the existing building. So if they ended up reducing it, they weren't required to do that, but they might have done it. I don't know.
No, they increased it.
Oh, they increased it?
That's what I'm saying. The original side yard was 1-foot 2 inches, went down to 9 inches. So that meant it got closer to the side lot line than it was originally. The other side of the building got a little further away from the side lot line because it was originally 4-foot 8 inches and the DOB plans say 4-foot 3 inches. So it seems like it shifted, creating a non-compliance on that side that went down to 9 inches.
Okay.
Then they put in proposed plans that must demolish that or something, because now the side yard's back up to 1-foot 2 inches.
But that's what they're proposing to do, right? To go back to the original. So, okay, I would say that what we're talking about is, at the time that they rebuilt their building, because without the rebuilt building, we don't have an existing building to go with. The other building is gone. Now we know for sure it's gone. There's no sidewalls, right? They're in different places. So to the extent that DOB could approve the sidewall location under the 2013 set, that's the legal structure that was allowed to be on the lot.
Right, okay, so if we're going to go from 2014 though, then didn't they remove all their exterior walls with the proposed?
No, we don't need to go to 2014. We need to go to returning this building to the legal building that DOB approved in 2014.
Right, but that had a 30-foot rear yard that's going to be 20 feet. It had a 17-foot 10-inch front yard that's going to be 18 feet. And it's got a 9-inch side yard that's going to be 1-foot 2 inches, and a 4-foot 3-inch side yard that's going to be 4-foot 8 inches, which makes it seem like they must be getting rid of all their walls if all the yards are changing,
Which one
though.
is, because I can't, which is the one that's the built one? See, I find
This
their
is
chart
the DOB
totally-
plan.
That's the 2014 approved plans, but I don't know what the existing situation is.
So this is the existing home project 214.
No, that's prior to the enlargement, I don't want to know about that.
This is the
I don't want to
original.
know about that one either. I don't understand what that second column is. I find that completely confusing. An existing home prior to the So So that, yeah.
Yeah, I was reading the second column as the one where they had some of those illegal enlargements, which they have removed, and are some going to be removed.
Yeah, but so that's the building that was built in the 30s or whatever had some illegal additions. So they were removing those illegal conditions. I don't really care about those. I want to know I want to compare the DOB approved set, which they were supposed to build, versus the set that, versus what was built. So it's an as-built set, the DOB set, and what needs to be done to the as-built in order to bring it to the DOB approved set. Because DOB is the one who determined which non-compliant conditions could be retained, right? And so, and then we can see from an as-built set with demolition to bring it to the previous legal non-compliant condition, then we'll be able to see whether there's any existing fabric to be retained.
What previous legal non-existing
So
condition?
DOB approved in 2013 or 14, whichever.
2014.
14, they approved drawings. The building that was constructed is very similar to that approved set. It may be off by directions, right? And then, so it's but that was a legal building. Had they built that building completely legally, we now have a legal existing non-complying building, which we could then look at as for the 73622, and what is it that you want to modify, right? To the extent that it isn't that today, they need to bring it back to that. Otherwise, we have an illegal building, and we can't talk about an illegal building.
Right, so assuming that they end up building what's here in 2014, okay? My question is still, to get from there to the proposed, they have to modify every single wall, every single exterior wall.
But I'm not saying they're going to go to the proposed. The question is, so the 2014 approved plans by DOB, that's the one, that's the second to the last line in the chart. That seems to be what DOB was good with, right? Where's the actual as-built? I don't know which one of these is what was built, what sits there on a lot today. Because that title, existing home prior to 2014 enlargement approved by DOB, doesn't seem to be the as-built.
Do we have a survey?
There is a survey, but again,
It's a
it's not the...
2013 survey, so it's not the
It's not
original
the-
survey.
Right. So we don't know the as-built, we don't have an as-built survey. So until we have as-built to compare to the 2014 approved plans, we don't know what things need to be moved, right? And frankly, you know, we have had this situation on another case way back when, where we said the only way to apply for a 622 is to bring the house back to an existing approvable condition and then come back here. Because it was built illegally anyway, right? So, so if they're going to, if essentially it requires demolition of a building in order to bring it back to what was permitted in the first place, they're going to have to do that because we don't have the authority to look at a demolished building or one that, you know, the one initial one doesn't exist anymore. There's no remnants of it.
Right, no, I know, and
Yeah.
I've seen that. I've seen when actually they've had to pursue an as-of-right enlargement, then come to us with the enlargement and say, okay, now we want to enlarge via the special permit.
Right.
And this is legal, and I assume that's what's going to be taking place. My question is then, though, still that they're going to have a high threshold to meet, because if they build it as they plan to build it in 2014, between that step and the proposed step would require demolishing all your exterior walls, is what I'm saying. And that you can't do.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
That was
okay.
my
Right, so the proposed
conversation.
may not look anything like.
Right, what they want it to look like
Right,
now.
exactly. So, yeah, so they need to go back to the 2014 approved project, have that, and then come to us with a proposal that doesn't remove more than 50% of the, right?
Right, because it looks like it would require that now, if you just look at the dimensions and how they're changing.
Okay, so, understood. And it's good, because the thing that's so unfortunate about this, you know, one reason why you should build according to the drawings that are approved by the Department of Buildings, is had they done that, had they built according to the approved plans, what they're asking for is just a straight line vertical extension, which, you know, is just obvious, right? And, you know, 20-foot rear yard is another subject, but the main issue is they were required to build this strange second floor with the funny setbacks, right? And I'm not even sure that they couldn't have done something like that as of right, because there is also a provision that as long as you comply with the setback rules above 30 feet, that, I think it's 30 feet, that you're allowed to have straight line extension as of right. So I'm not sure whether the architect took advantage of that section.
Is that permitted in the zoning district?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't look at it, but there are provisions where they understand that vertical extensions along the same existing non-compliant condition should be allowed, but not always. So it just depends, I don't know, they need to
Yeah, I'm not sure
calculate
if the
it.
zoning district permits that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I just want to say that the site was in disarray when it was first submitted to us, and we told them to clean up the site before it was calendared and did so.
Okay. The other thing that's so crazy about these things is that we're supposed to have a surveyor come and, you know, and actually indicate the lines on which the building is built. So the idea that you build a building that looks like the drawings, but the building is in the wrong place, is astonishing to me. Because it means they didn't have a surveyor. It means the contractor came and he measured with his, whatever, his ruler and said, this looks like about 9 inches. Okay.
Move on.
Yeah.
Item number 2, 2017-205 BC, 555 Mayrard Avenue, the Bronx. And item number 3, 2017-206 BC, 4449 Bronx Boulevard, the Bronx.
Okay. So we have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board 12 voted to approve with 16 in favor, 2 opposed, and 6 abstaining. Councilmember Andrew Cohen provided a letter of support. The statement of facts doesn't describe the configuration of the zoning lot. State whether the building adjacent to this one is on the same zoning lot, whether the parking lot is adjacent to the subject lot, or discuss the right-of-way from parking lot to building and who is the owner of that property on which the right-of-way is located. So that was more like having to figure that out just by looking at lots of documents. So the statement of facts should have made that clear. Also, doesn't the right-of-way also have to be the subject of this variance? The 2013 deed from the U.S. government to the Doe Fund appears to describe the area shown as an easement area on the survey as instead being owned in fee. That area appears to be part of Lot 75, which is owned by Montefiore Medical Center. I find that very confusing. I also saw that the Doe Fund then transfers ownership of the property to the HDFC. And when it does that, it treats that area as an easement area. So that almost sounds like the Doe Fund reserved the fee and handed an easement area over to the HDFC. I actually don't understand what happened. It owned it in fee, then it doesn't own it in fee. I don't get it. With respect to the A finding, this appears to hinge on the withdrawal of the public funding for the as-of-right use. Is it solely funding that forces the, that's my question is it solely funding that forces the proposed use group 3A, or is it the terms of the federal and state agreements regarding the use? I'm just trying to, in terms of how we look at the A finding, a lot of the discussion seems to be about money like without the money from government, there is no project, as opposed to federal and state regulatory processes. And so we need to be clear, because if it's only money, you could say, could you like borrow the money from a bank? Let me just finish. So could you borrow money from a bank, as opposed to, which I don't think that is a very strong argument, because just because you can't get the money today doesn't mean you can get the money tomorrow from a bank, arguably. But what I think is really driving this is the regulatory agreements, not the funding. Because the feds give the land and say, unless it's used for a homeless function, you don't get to keep the land, you default.
That's what I got from it.
Yeah, that's what it is. Right.
To me, it was pretty clear that was their main hardship, was that they had that legal limitation to provide housing for the homeless, and within an M1, the only type of housing is temporary housing. And once that was yanked away from them because of no funding, then they were stuck.
Right. But it shouldn't be that it shouldn't be driven by whether or not you can get money from the government, because lots of projects are arguably built where you get low-interest loans from Chase Manhattan Bank or something. Chase, for example, is famous for doing these kinds of loans in neighborhoods, and they're low-interest loans under whatever kind of a program. So arguably, you can get money. And I don't think money should be, access to the funding source should be what drives it. It should really be that there's a deed restriction on the property, and that's what's forcing them to do this.
I think right, but the deed restriction allows them to have transitional housing, so they have to get from the fact that they can't provide that transitional housing to providing the permanent part, the permanent supportive housing, and that only way to get there is with the funding conversation.
Right. So then, the only way to get there is with the funding.
Right.
So is there, so that's the part where I'm having a little bit of problems, because if the only way to get there is with getting money, can we say that is, that the inability to get money from government is adequate? That is adequate for the EA. That's the part that I'm struggling with a little bit. However, when we look at other not-for-profits, we're not in the A part with that. I guess maybe we're in the B part with that, or something else, where we do ask them, what's the critical mass that you need in order for this to be a viable project, for example? So
right. I think here, since the bulk is not the issue, it's the use in question.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm just trying to make a comparison to other cases.
Right, but you can't apply that here, though, because they're saying that it's not feasible to provide the transitional, homeless shelter. So there's never going to be a critical mass for that's going to make it feasible.
Right,
because they can't do it.
But what I'm saying is, we do in other cases look at funding as an aspect of viability, right? When we look at affordable housing cases, for example, where they say, if we don't have 93 units, it's a no-go, right? If we had 56 units, it doesn't create the critical mass. And then the funding agency won't fund, and we can't really run a business, we can't run a building like that because 53 units is inadequate, because you really need 93, wherever.
Right, but in this case, though, they can't get any funding because the mayor has deemed this no longer a policy initiative. So no matter what size they would make it, they would not get funding. So the only other, if they were to follow that line, the only other thing they could do is go to 1,000 banks and have each bank turn them down and say, no, we're not in the position to fund homeless shelters, no matter what size it is. We don't consider that feasible. And part of that has to do with probably a homeless shelter doesn't just need funding to be built, it needs funding to be maintained.
Right.
And so it's like throwing money in. It's really, you're never going to get anything back if you're a bank. What are you going to get back?
The homeless shelters and many of these supportive housing they cannot rely on solely private funding. Private funding is a very small subset of the amount. By and large, the most amount of the money is coming from the government subsidies, because that is taking care of not only the construction, but also the operation and maintenance of the building in the long term. So like the Section 8 vouchers and a lot of these other things that are coming in is actually helping in the maintenance and operations of it. And the private source does not take care of the maintenance of it. It's only a construction loan. So in pretty much by and large, all these nonprofit organizations, they're relying their significant source, or I would say sole source, just on government funding to construct and operate these organizations.
How about like the Salvation Army that runs all those shelters? They're probably donation-based as opposed to.
But in this case, they're getting, well, it could be donation, but they're also getting other sources, federal sources. They could be getting government.
We don't know.
We don't know, but
yeah. No, but I'm just trying to narrow this in so that I get totally that the regulatory agreement from the from federal government is such that it's not like you can, like there was a woman who wrote a letter in opposition that we just got, who she says she wants it to be condo units. So, and she doesn't understand that it's not allowed to be condos because of the regulatory agreement under the property transfer. So that part makes it clear. And so I'm just wondering whether there's like just a little bit more there where it's not just relying on funding, it's also relying on the ability to obtain approvals and things like that. Where it's one thing if the feds tell you to do something, but it's another thing that if the local government says, you're not allowed to do it, right?
So couldn't they use the good faith reliance argument to lay over that? Because it was good faith reliance on a valid permit and funding from the city, and the city removed that funding at a critical point where there was no backing out.
Right.
So couldn't it be the combination of the federal disposition agreement with the limitations as well as the good faith reliance on cities authorizing this and allowing funding and then reversing it?
Yeah, so I actually think this is like a combination of a lot of different kinds of cases, because there's good faith reliance, which is really a very strange one, because like they included Jane Estates as a detrimental reliance example, but it's actually, it's like a twist here, because with Jane Estates, they want to continue to do what they were doing, right? And all of a sudden, they're prevented from doing what they've been doing. And the question is, we want to keep going. In this one, it's, we want to continue what we're doing, but the government is not only not allowing us to do it, it's making us do something entirely different. But now, okay, we're willing to do this thing that's entirely different. So it's an extremely bizarre, you rely on to your detriment and spend all this money, and now to your detriment you have to build this thing that you don't actually really want to build, but you'll build it anyway because otherwise the place stands vacant, and then you'll be in default of the federal transfer. So, and I had more questions. So, I'd like them to provide, there's a letter referred to in their letter of May 25th, 2017 termination letter from DHS and DSS. It refers to a November 4th, 16 termination letter. I'd like a copy of that because I'd like to understand better what the terms were on that. That May letter states that the city intends to provide funding for the proposed use. Quote, once DOE submits technically viable proposals for such funding. I'd like to know whether DOE submitted those proposals and have they been accepted by whichever city agencies will provide funding, and can they provide some assurances from such agencies that there will be funding for the project. Because again, on other projects like that are more straightforward, where it's affordable housing, we say, it's one thing to claim that you need 93 units of housing. Where's the letter from the agency that says it's going, that's the critical number, and that it's actually going to fund you, right? So we don't have that because so much of their argument is relying on this inability to be funded but for the homeless shelter. So there needs to be then a demonstration of an intent to fund for this permanent housing.
And will somebody from one of the funding agencies be here tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And also, there's all these declarations and contracts that are recorded against the property that commit the property owner to develop the site as a shelter, basically. So I'm just curious about what happens to all those. Do they need to be terminated in order to move forward with the proposed project? Like, what ties everything together, puts all the ducks in a row to make this happen? Because as it stands right now, they're required to provide transitional housing. That's what it says in all the regulatory documents. And then the other thing in terms of a finding, it's like it's almost like a primer in a case, in a findings. It's like it's got so many different ones, other than maybe even probably even got unique physical condition going for it. But so that one, it's also, if you looked at a similar thing, would be like the government condemns the property and ends up leaving a teeny little spot where you can develop. This one is the government condemns the property, says that it has to be used for X use, and an opposing government re-condemns the property and says you have to use it for Y use. It's like a sort of a double whammy on condemnation and really deprivation of property rights, because they were ready to use, it's limited to this one use. You cannot use it to build condos, and then it gets further limited to an even tighter margin. It's like, it's like the train.
Couldn't that in and of itself be a unique finding, that it is the only property that has been doubly condemned, period?
Yeah, exactly. So I think those are stronger in a certain way than we can't find the money. It just keeps getting narrowed and narrowed and narrowed until there's only one thing you can do. And if you don't do that thing, you end up walking away from the property and the feds get it back, right? So, not to mention having expended $9 million, which we didn't mention before. So you were also deprived of the $9 million. Arguably, it's not your money, but yes, it is. You're responsible for paying it back somehow under whatever the lending agreements were, or granting agreements. Yeah, that's the cell phone telling you what time it is. Okay. And then, I had another question. Something is referred to as congregate permanent supportive housing program about one of the Doe Fund's existing facilities. I just don't know what a congregate permanent supportive housing program is. And then the other is, any of the floor area created by the addition of the new facade exempt under the floor area definition for energy efficiency additions, because they say the floor area goes up, but there's like an 8-inch, I think it's 8-inch, allowance to add to the facade of the building if you're recladding it, and normally the reason for recladding is energy efficiency, and in this case, there's so many holes in the building, certainly the recladding will improve the energy efficiency. Also, they should discuss further, and they didn't at all, why the parking area cannot be developed eventually with additional supportive housing. It says we can't eventually develop it or something. Or why isn't that just a landscape area as a park for residents? And what's the need really for 23 parking spaces with this use? Like, why isn't it being used as green space? And I'm also curious if there's access in any way for residents to the sort of green space that's well, actually, it's train tracks before there's a river, right? So maybe it's not so bucolic as all that, but still. Then also to discuss the relationship of the basement level units to the adjacent outdoor space. What's the elevation at the interior versus the exterior for those basement units? They're not cellar units, the way I understand. And is a waiver for height and setback from Bullard Avenue required since community facility buildings are permitted in the district and not 3A are permitted in the district? I'm just curious whether, whether this is an existing, whether you shift from one chapter to the next, whether there's therefore a non-compliance that's created with height and setback. That's more like anticipating DOB's saying something. And then in the connecting portion between the parking lot and the building, I'd like to know what the treatment is along the perimeter. The planting plan doesn't show any planting, and it isn't clear what the fencing situation is. And then with respect to seeker, in the earlier version of this project, the Department of Homeless Services was the lead agency, and in 2012 issued a negative declaration. A phase 1 and a limited phase 2 were prepared in 2014 for bank review, so that's not the same level of phase 2 that's normally required under seeker. So we need an updated we did receive an updated EAS, and we have still open air quality, hazmat, noise, and noise issues, which of course might take some while to resolve, so an E-designation is something that should be considered here.
Do they have to submit, I guess they have to submit a firm map for this project.
They need to what?
Submit a firm map for this
Oh,
project.
yeah, of course.
For our new procedures.
Yeah. Anything more? No? Okay. Good.
Item number 4, 2017-225BZ, 30L6 East 61st Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial applications to official and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Interestingly, Community Board 8 disapproved by a vote of 26 with 8 abstentions. So they disapproved this without any explanation. I'd like to know the reason for this, though I'm taking a wild guess. When I Googled this, I found that the Daily News reported in 2016 that there was a lawsuit against the same spa located in Tribeca for inappropriate behavior by an unlicensed massage therapist. It was kind of a racy case. I won't get into detail. So I would say, I'm not sure what DOI looks for when they're looking, but we should ask them again to take a look at this. Actually, just to say, the case in Tribeca was exactly what this special permit was created to prevent. So,
So do you want me to reach out to the community board and ask them to give us a detailed letter as to why? Okay.
Yes, and also DOI to alert them to this case and whether, because they may not have made the connection, though I don't know why, since the names of the spa are the same.
Okay. You have the addresses in there somewhere? Of the Tribeca place or?
I'll look. It'll show up in 2 seconds on your Google search. It tells the address.
Okay, fine.
Okay. All right.
This concludes the public review session for January 22nd, 2017. I'm sorry, did anybody else? Are you finished? Sorry. Sorry, I thought you were finished. Sorry, I'm sorry.
I just realized it says 2017.
2018, yeah, I know, it has to be fixed. That's that one last page. We're done?
One last page for.